Shalom, how's everyone doing? Today's day 31 of the Kitzur Shulchan, and we're learning Siman Seif Aleph. Ksiv, the pasuk says, "V'chisisa seyasecha," you should cover your tzoa. Ki Hashem elokecha mishalech b'kerev machanecha, because Hashem walked in among your camp. V'haya machanecha kadosh, and your camp should be holy. V'lo yirevecha ervas davar, and it shall not be seen in it any matter of nakedness. Mikan lamdu rabosinu zechuna l'mavracha. Right, Chazal learned from these psukim shebechol makom asher Hashem Elokeinu mesalech imanu, that any place that Hashem walks among us, tahainu kishanu oskim b'dvar shebekdusha, right, meaning any time we say any matters related to holiness, kigon kriyat shema, tefillah, Torah v'chadoma, right, like when we're saying Shema, when we're saying davening, when we're learning Torah, anything like that. Tzarech lios hamachna kadosh, the camp has to be holy. Meaning, shelo sehei tzoa megulasham, there shouldn't be any tzoa revealed there. V'shelo yireh dvar erva, and no matter of nakedness should be seen. Kineged panav shel adam hakori o mispalal, facing the person either saying Shema or davening. Okay? So if you look in Parshas Kitzur, there's a whole parsha there that talks about going out to war. And it says, it talks about a few dinim about somebody who goes out to war. Right, this is Parakaf Gimel, starts Pasuk Yud, it says, Ki seitze machna aleivecha, you're going to go out to war, and obviously every war has like a camp, and that they come back to after the battle. And there's a halacha there. The halacha is, V'yaset yelecha ala zeinecha, that you should always carry a shovel with you. Why? V'chafartava, you should use it to dig. V'chisisa seyasecha, because you're going to have to cover your tzoa. Right? Obviously, during a war, obviously at some point you're going to have to use the bathroom. And there's a halacha, when you make tzoa, and there's a halacha, the pasuk says that you have to cover it. Why? The next pasuk explains. It says, Ki Hashem elokecha mesalech b'kerev machanecha, because Hashem walks among the camp. V'haya machanecha kadosh, and the camp has to be holy. And the next thing it says, V'lo yevecha ervas davar, and there shouldn't be any matter of nakedness there. There should be nothing naked over there. So the pasuk is telling, the Torah is telling us two things. One, you're going to go out to war, you're going to go to the camp. And you have to make sure, one, that all tzoa is covered, all tzoa is covered, and two, there can't be anything naked over there. So those are two things that the Torah says about going out to war. So the question is that, right, the Kitzur says this applies to saying any davar shebekdusha, right, davening, saying a brachos, that there can't be any tzoa revealed when you're saying a bracha, there can't be an erva in front of you when you're davening or anything. The question is, how do we know that? The Torah is just talking about going out to war. So there's a few mahalchim that we could take. First, we'll start with the Ramban. The Ramban, he wants to know why there is even an isser for tzoa or an erva to be revealed in the camp, in the camp during the war. So he says that it's like what the pasuk says. The pasuk says that Hashem is misalech imanu, that when we go out to war, Hashem's with us. Right? And he explains that usually when somebody goes out to war, he might have thoughts to himself, kochi v'otzim yadi, like, my great physical strength is going to win this war for me. It's going to win the war for us. So Hashem's saying, no, I'm with you in the camp. You have to remember that you can't be somech on your own physical strength. You have to be somech on me, that I'm fighting your battles for you. Therefore, there's a special kedusha that you find when Klal Yisrael goes out to war. And he explains that's why we covered tzoa. Why do we cover tzoa? So he explains, tzoa is not normal tumah, right? Tzoa is not tameh, right? What's tameh? A dead body is tameh. What's his proof that tzoa is not just like, it's not something tameh? Because, think about it. Let's say you have a dead body, that transmits tumah. Let's say you covered the dead body. Does that help? So the answer is, it doesn't help, right? The tumah goes up to Shemaim. But when it comes to tzoa, the Torah is clearly telling us, that you cover your tzoa, and that's good enough. Why? What's the difference? So he says, the whole idea of tzoa is that it shouldn't be seen. Why? It's like what we're saying, that in a war camp, you have to have these thoughts of kedusha, that you have to know that Hashem's fighting our battles for us. There's a sense of kedusha there. And if you would look at tzoa, something that he calls a gnai, right? Tzoa is a gnai. Tzoa is a disgusting thing. So you're going to look at it, and it's going to mess up your kavanas leiv hatahor, right? In the war, you're supposed to have this great kavana that you're fighting for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem's fighting for you. looking at soa is going to mess up your kavanah. Looking at something disgusting will mess up your kavanah, or looking at a matter of nakedness that will also mess up your kavanah. Therefore, there is a hakbada, there's a chiyuv to remove these things from the camp. So that's why the Ramban explains. That's how we know whenever somebody davens, whenever somebody learns Torah, he also has to have this kavanah. He also has to have this kavanah that he's doing, he's learning for Hashem, he's davening for Hashem. So we'll ruin that. So he says, even though the Torah is specifically talking about the war camp, we could obviously learn that out to any place where there's hakpada, that there's kedusha, right? Just like the machne has kedusha, so too every time we daven there's kedusha. So obviously there's also a chiyuv to get rid of tzoa when somebody's davening. That's one mahalach we could take. However, Rashi in Masechus Shabbos Taf Kuf Nun takes a different mahalach, and he says as follows. He says, right, basically the Gemara in Masechus Shabbos quotes this pasuk of Hayimach and Kadosh, and he says, we learn from there that whenever somebody's in a place that there's soa, he can't think and learning. And he says, so Rashi's really dealing with the question, but that's just talking about the camp, it's not talking about learning. So he says, no, what are you talking about? Yisrael Mahar and Tamid B'Divrei Torah. Jews are always thinking and learning, right? So even though the pasuk is talking about the war camp and saying, in the war camp you can't have tzoa over there. You know the reason why you can't have tzoa there is because what are Jews doing when they come back from war? They go to the camp. They're thinking and learning. They're mahar b'divrei Torah, right? They're davening. They're doing all that stuff. So therefore, that's why the pasuk is talking about the war camp. That's what people do. They're thinking and learning there. But obviously, this doesn't just apply to the war camp. It applies to any place where Jews are going to be thinking and learning. So far we have two mahalchim that explain how we know from the psukim here that even though it's just talking about the war camp, it really applies to all. Anytime you say Dvarim Shebekdusha, we have the approach of the Ramban that we say, just like the war camp is holy, so too whenever we daven it's holy. And Rashi is just saying that this was just an example of a place that people are learning Torah. But obviously, if you're learning Torah, there can't be tzoa in front of you. But what it comes up from the Rashi and the Ramban that, right, just like there's a chiyuv deoraisa in the war camp to cover tzoa, so too that chiyuv deoraisa even would extend to any time you're saying Dvarim Shebekdusha, because it's the same reason. So the chiyuv deoraisa would apply in both cases. However, there's a different mahalach. That's the mahalach of the Sefer HaChinuch. So the Sefer HaChinuch, when he explains this mitzvah, he says, you know why there's a chiyuv in the war camp to cover tzoa? Because who went out to war? The Gemara says who went out to war? Only the people who weren't afraid they did averos went out to war. Only that tzaddikim went out to war. That's who went out. There was a hakpara when people went out to war. They would ask, are you afraid that you do averos? If they answered yes, sorry. Yeah. They don't want anybody who does averos in the war. Therefore, there was this special special madrega. Those people who went out to war. So because of that special madriga, that people who were in the war were on this higher level, they had this special halacha. They had a special halacha, chisisa seyasecha. You can't do anything that will bring you down, right? Right? Because there's an idea like, at least Talmidei Chacham, they have the special nikiyas, they have the special cleanliness, right? We don't want to bring that down, because we want the people in the camp to be the top of the top. And soa, or obviously a matter of nakedness, will bring them down. And then the Sefer HaChinuch goes on and he says that this mitzvah only applies to Zecharim, or to males, because they're the ones who go out to war. And it only applies to the Beis HaMikdash Kayim, because that's when they had a real din of war. What do I want to bring up from Sefer HaChinuch? Sefer HaChinuch seems to say that, there was a special hakbara when you go out to war. Since they were like the top of the top, there had to be no tzoa or erva. Would that apply to just anybody saying Davar Shebekdusha? Would that apply? That's unclear. So it could be right. Obviously, the Sefer Chinuch agrees with this idea that when you're saying Dvarim Shebekdusha, you can't have tzoa in front of you. Right? That's what Chazal say. But maybe it's only in Issur D'Rabbanan. The Torah doesn't talk about it. Maybe it's only in Issur D'Rabbanan. So I would like to suggest that maybe Rashi and the Ramban, they hold no, that the Issur D'Oraisa to have tzoa in front of you applies in the camp, and it also applies when somebody's saying Dvarim Shebekdusha. But maybe the Sefer Chinuch says no, the real D'Oraisa that the pasuk is talking about is talking about specifically the war camp. That doesn't apply B'Zman Hazeh. We don't go out to war. And okay, there's the idea that when somebody's saying Torah or learning, saying Torah or davening, he can't have Torah in front of him. Maybe that's only going to be a D'Rabbanan. That's what I would like to suggest. Okay, but what do we assume? Do we assume it's a D'Oraisa? Do we assume it's a D'Rabbanan? The assumption seems to be, right, even if you look in the Gemara says, it uses the Lashon of Asur Torah, it says the Torah Asurs, and the Rashba is Mefurish, and Mesachas Baruch says Deoraisa, it seems like it's Deoraisa. Okay, so let's assume it's Deoraisa. Is there going to be Malkus, right? Usually when somebody does an Isser Deoraisa, he gets Malkus, so let's think about it. When somebody learns Torah, or says any Davar Shekdusha in front of Tzoa, is there going to be Malkus there? So the Prima Gadim deals with this, and the Prima Gadim says, no, this idea of not having Tzoa in front of you, that's not an Isser, right? It's not Asr to daven in front of Tzoa, right? He says, look at the Pasuk. The Pasuk says, you're going to use the bathroom, and there's a mitzvah, v'chisi saseh asacha. It's a mitzvah saseh. It's a mitzvah saseh. So therefore, obviously, there's not going to be Malkus, because it's just a mitzvah saseh, right? Not doing a mitzvah saseh, it's not going to give you Malkus. Okay. But then he says, no, then the Pasuk says, lo yirav chayra stavar. That's an Isser. The Pasuk says first, you cannot see a Dvar Erva. So maybe there would be Malkus if you daven or learn in front of an Erva. So that he says there's also not Malkus because it's considered a lav she'in bo ma'aseh. Because what's the Isser? The Isser is just saying Dvar Shebekdusha. And in most cases, we say that speech is not a ma'aseh, therefore there would be no Malkus.